Hello, I am Eric Martin here at Lewis Clark State College, and if you were watching this video, you are probably in my History 101 or History 102 online course. The first week of material is identical for both those courses. This video is going to summarize some of the conclusions we should have gotten out of that first week of class, and it is also going to focus a little bit on class procedures and processes, particularly making sure that we all understand how to have a good online discussion, since so much of this course is focused around the issue of class discussion. By now, you should have received a grade for your first set of discussion posts. The grade more or less reflects how many of the required discussions you actually participated in, but there's also some quality issues connected to this first grade as well. This first grade, I just wanted to kind of get us moving. It's only worth 10 points. If you received a 5 out of 10, it means that you probably did not have any postings based on those Bridging World History videos. That's required material that we need to cover. You have to get postings up on the required material. If you received a 7 something, you probably participated in everything you were supposed to participate in, but you kind of did the minimal. All right, and this is just first week impressions, If you received an 8.5 or an 8.9, you probably received a comment that said something along the lines of, "This is pretty good. Consider participating in the optional discussion each week for extra points." It was fine. So that gives you some kind of a sense for each one of those. Now, some general things that everybody could do to improve their discussion post grades. Number one, formalize them. You need to use capital letters. You need to use punctuation. You need to use paragraphs. These are not emails to your buddies. These are your postings for a discussion board, and so formalize them as much as you can. You, on the one hand, you're not being graded on it, and on the other hand, you are. It's this issue of perceptions. Talk to each other in the discussion board. Trying to replicate a class discussion, like a face-to-face class discussion online, that is not easy. In part because the online class discussions, it is so natural, I suppose, for students to write all your postings as if they're addressed to me. That would never happen in a class. I wouldn't have 6 people in a row say exactly the same thing. So y'all try not to do that. Y'all really focus on trying to say something new, try to add something to the conversation. That's what those threads are supposed to be. Use your words. There were a couple of y'all who directly cut and paste right off the video transcript, or you might as well have paraphrased it, but it was very obvious where it all came from. There's not a right answer, for this stuff. We're talking about what we saw, so let's hear your thoughts and not so much the proper video transcript. You probably, from this point forward, for a required discussion, you're going to need to have at least 2 postings a week. And those 2 postings a week, in order to get a good grade in the class, probably need to be pretty substantial. You're probably better off having 3, maybe 4 postings a week. You're going to have that first one up by Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. And then you're going to need to have that second one up to help foster the conversation along. And then the rest of them, you'll have to sort that out. We'll see how that works, okay? Yeah, I think that's probably it on the discussion posts for right now, with one exception. The future discussions are going to be focused mostly on the documents in the Worlds of History text. So make sure your discussions are focused on that. Make sure that you have read, make sure you're able to convey some of the issues in those readings. And I'm going to come back to that in just a second. One of the threads that y'all worked with last week was the coming to these ideas about what is history. And I want to speak to that for just a minute. I don't want to rehash a bunch of stuff that you've already done. I actually was pretty happy with the amount of material you covered in the What is History thread. But I did want to say a couple of things about it, just to make sure that we are all on the same page. Because history, the term history can mean different things, depending on who it is. History can often mean storytelling, which is one of the reasons a lot of us get interested in history. History can often mean a moral example, which is one of the reasons that people often say that history is an important field for us to examine, because we can learn something about morality in the process. But both history as storytelling and history as moral example maybe are they don't always reflect what happened. They reflect sometimes what makes a good story, and sometimes they reflect the moral point somebody wants to make. But in terms of reflections about what actually happened, now we're talking about history as analysis, and that's the big focus for this course is history as analysis. Now, the easy answer, right, for history is it's the change over time, but it's the change over time based on evidence. And this class is going to be focused on the evidence. That book, Worlds of History, is our lab. That's our lab materials. That's our evidence. And as a class, as a group, we are going to run experiments on that evidence to see what that evidence tells us. So we could have a class where I just told you, this is what happened in history, absorb my knowledge. But I'm not certain that's the way history really works. There's a lot of discussions, there's a lot of debates amongst historians about what actually happened. And those debates are based on the evidence. So the Bridging World History videos provide the context, overall context, for you to understand the time frame that those documents come from. And then those documents each give us a question or an issue for us to think about. And while you're in this class, you're all historians. So you're all assessing and interpreting evidence. Now, some of that evidence is going to be primary source evidence. That's stuff from the time of study. That's, Hammurabi's Code and the Epic of Gilgamesh and all that kind of good stuff. And some of the evidence is secondary sources. And the secondary sources are what historians have written about the time period. And so you need to be familiar with both in order to come up with your own interpretations, because historical interpretations sometimes change over time as new evidence becomes available, as people start getting interested in new things. So I wanted to emphasize that part, just to make sure that I think it helps to keep that idea about evidence and interpretation in the forefront of our mind as we're going through the discussion boards, because the point of the discussion boards is supposed to be, I've given you a discussion or a discussion question, and now we're going to use the evidence in the chapter to address the question and give ourselves some practice interpreting and thinking about historical evidence. And that's probably good enough. I mean, I put a posting in the What is History thread that covers some of this kind of stuff in more detail. I encourage you to read that. I put a posting that gave you a little more biographical information about myself. in the introductory part. But that's probably all I needed to say about class process and about history right now. I apologize for not having a fancier set of scripts and stuff for this series. I thought that it would be better to get you something done on the fly in the basement of my house on the days I'm not actually in the office than it would be to and get that to you now than it would be for me to work on something that maybe in a year I could use because the production value was very slick and looked good. So anyway, that's that for right now. Continue on with the materials for week 2. I think I'll probably put up another video in just a few minutes on that. If you have any questions at all, any concerns at all about the course, now is the time for us to chat. You feel free to email me through the Blackboard website. I'll get to those emails as soon as I can. You feel free to call me in the office. My office hours are Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10:30 until 11:45 and Wednesdays from 1:30 until 2:30. I'm in the office a lot more than that. If I'm in, I'll pick up the phone. But that's when I'm definitely in. Feel free to drop by my office for online students if you can do that. That's probably great. I'm happy to arrange a Skype or a Google Hangout so we can see each other's face. That might be useful, but if you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me. Now's the time, and enjoy your historical studies.